The garden is quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes after rain, soft and clean and full of birdsong. This is a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something has gone wrong, the kind where the air itself seems to hold its breath. Two people stand in a thicket of trees. They are not resting. They are not looking at the flowers. They are hiding. And then, footsteps. The sound of God walking in the cool of the day. A sound that, until this morning, had always made them run toward him. Now they press further back into the shadows. Now they pull leaves around their shoulders. Now the man who was made from the ground presses himself against the ground and hopes for the first time in his life that God will not find him. And then God speaks. 4 Hebrew words. Ayeka. Where are you?
It is the first question God ever asks a human being in all of Scripture. Not, what have you done? Not, why did you disobey me? Not, do you have any idea what you have started? Just, where are you? We will come back to those 4 words. I promise you that. But right now, I need you to understand something about that man hiding in the trees, because you already know him better than you think you do. His name is Adam, and he was not the last person to run from God. In the next 25 minutes, you are going to meet 5 people who ran. A man who hid in a garden, a murderer who hid in a desert for 40 years, a prophet who ran in the exact opposite direction God told him to go, another prophet who, after the greatest miracle of his life, walked into a wilderness and asked God to let him die, and a fisherman who 3 times in one night looked into the face of a servant girl and said he had never met the man he loved more than his own life. 5 people, 5 different reasons to run, and one pattern running through all of them. A pattern that just might be the most important thing you learn about God this year. Stay with me.
Let us start with the runner most people think they understand. Moses. You know the name. You know the basket in the river. You know the burning bush, the plagues, the parting of the sea. You know the version of Moses that shows up on stained glass windows, staff raised, white hair, the voice of God thundering through him. But that Moses came later, much later. Before all of that, there was a different Moses, a younger Moses, a Moses with blood on his hands and sand under his feet, and a very good reason to never stop running. Here is what the Sunday school version leaves out. Moses grew up in Pharaoh's palace, not as a servant, not as a curiosity, as a son. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, writes that Moses was not just educated in the Egyptian court, he was brilliant in it, trained in military strategy, fluent in the language of power. By the time he was a grown man, he was one of the most prominent figures in the most powerful empire on earth.
And he walked away from all of it in a single afternoon. He went out to where his people, the Hebrew slaves, were working in the brutal Egyptian sun. He saw an Egyptian overseer beat a Hebrew man, and something broke open inside him. He looked one direction, he looked the other. He killed the overseer and buried him in the sand. The next day, he went back. 2 Hebrews were fighting each other. Moses tried to intervene, and one of them said something that turned his blood cold. Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? The secret was out. Moses ran. Not to a neighboring city. He ran to Midian, across the Sinai Peninsula, past the reach of Pharaoh's soldiers, as far from Egypt as a man could travel on foot. He sat down by a well. He was exhausted, alone, and finished. The life he had built, finished. The people he had tried to help, abandoned. The identity he had carried since the river, shattered. He would stay in that desert for 40 years.
Think about that number. 40 years. If you are 20 right now, 40 years from now, you will be 60. If you are 30, you will be 70. Moses did not spend a season in the wilderness. He spent the better part of a lifetime there. He married a woman named Zipporah. He had sons. He built a quiet life tending sheep for his father-in-law Jethro on the backside of the desert, where nobody from his old life would ever look for him. And here is what most people miss. The Bible never says God was angry with Moses during those 40 years. It never says Moses was being punished. It never says the wilderness was a prison sentence. What the text actually says, quietly, almost in passing, is that God saw, God heard, God remembered. Exodus chapter 2 ends with 4 of the most important words in the Old Testament. God heard their groaning. Moses was running, and God was watching. Not with fury, not with a stopwatch, with the patience of someone who knows exactly what a broken man needs before he can become what he was always meant to be. A burning bush, a voice, a name Moses had never heard. I am who I am. And a commission that cut through 40 years of silence like light through a doorway. I have seen the suffering of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their pain. And I am sending you. Moses had 5 objections. 5 times he tried to talk God out of it. Who am I? What if they don't believe me? I am not a good speaker. Please, send someone else. And God answered every single one. Because the God who let Moses run for 40 years had not forgotten why he let him go there in the first place. The desert had done something in Moses that the palace never could have. It stripped away the Egyptian in him, the strategist, the man who solved problems with his hands. What came out the other side of 40 years of silence was something rarer. A man who had learned to wait. A man who, when God finally spoke from a fire that did not consume, fell down and hid his face. Not because he was afraid of God, because he had spent 40 years learning what it felt like to be truly seen by him. Now, if Moses is the runner who did not mean to run, Jonah is something else entirely. Jonah knew exactly what he was doing. God spoke to Jonah with unusual clarity. No burning bush, no angel, just a direct command. Go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, because their wickedness has come up before me. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians were not a people the ancient world felt neutral about. They were known for a specific kind of military cruelty, documented, deliberate, and designed to be remembered. They impaled captives on poles outside conquered cities. They stacked skulls into pyramids at city gates. They were the thing that made children in Israel go quiet when someone said the word north. God told Jonah to go preach to them. Jonah bought a ticket to Spain. Not literally. Tarshish was a port, probably in the western Mediterranean, the farthest point of the known ancient world in the opposite direction from Nineveh. Jonah did not take a small detour. He went to Joppa, found a ship going as far west as ships went, paid his fare, and went below deck. To sleep. This is the detail that always stops me. He went below deck to sleep. This was not a man wrestling with his conscience. This was not a man pacing the rails, staring at the horizon, thinking about turning around. Jonah had made his decision. He had paid his fare. He was done. Now watch what happens next. God sent a storm. Not a squall, not rough weather. The Hebrew uses the same word for the chaos winds at creation.
A great wind hurled into the sea. The ship threatened to break apart. Experienced sailors, men who had seen storms their whole careers, were terrified. They threw cargo overboard. They cried out to their gods. And still the storm grew. Jonah slept. The captain shook him awake. "Pray to your God. Maybe your God will notice us." The sailors cast lots to find out who had brought this on them. The lot fell on Jonah. "Who are you? Where are you from? What have you done?" And Jonah told them the truth. "I am a Hebrew. I worship the God who made the sea and the dry land. I am running from him. Throw me in. The storm will stop."
The sailors tried everything else first. They rowed harder. They called out to God not to hold innocent blood against them. But the storm would not stop. So they threw him in. The sea went calm. And a great fish, the Hebrew is dag gadol, simply a great fish, species unspecified, swallowed Jonah whole. He sat in the dark, in the deep, for 3 days and 3 nights, with nowhere left to run. And here is the part nobody tells you. Jonah chapter 2 is a psalm. Inside the stomach of a fish, in total darkness, at the bottom of the sea, Jonah wrote a song. Not a song of despair, a song of thanksgiving. Before he was rescued, before he saw daylight, before anything had changed except one thing. He had stopped running. "When my life was fainting away," he wrote, "I remembered the Lord." The fish brought him to shore. God said, "Go to Nineveh." Jonah went. The whole city repented, from the king on his throne to the animals in their stalls. The largest single revival recorded in the Old Testament. And Jonah sat outside the city and told God he was angry enough to die. Because he had always known God would show mercy. That was why he ran. Not because he feared Nineveh, because he feared God would forgive them. And God did. And Jonah could not stand it. The book ends without resolution. God asks a question, and the text simply stops. We never find out if Jonah answered. We never find out if he made peace with the mercy he had tried to outrun across the width of the Mediterranean Sea. But we know this: the fish brought him back to shore, and the shore brought him back to the road. And the road led, eventually, reluctantly, furiously, to the place God had always been pointing him. You cannot outswim the current of God's purpose. You can delay it. You can pay your fare and go below deck and pretend the storm is not about you. But the lot always falls on Jonah. If Jonah ran from his calling, Elijah ran from something harder. He ran from himself. You need to understand what had happened the day before Elijah sat down under that broom tree and asked God to let him die. Because the timing is what makes this story almost impossible to understand, until it suddenly makes complete sense of everything you have ever felt after a season of doing something great. One day earlier, Elijah had stood on top of Mount Carmel and called down fire from heaven. Not metaphorically. He had soaked a stone altar with 12 full jars of water until it was drenched and the trenches around it were full. He had stood before 850 false prophets and the entire nation of Israel. He had prayed one prayer, and fire had fallen and consumed the sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up every drop of water in the trench. The entire nation of Israel fell on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The greatest public miracle since the parting of the sea. And the next morning, Elijah ran.
Queen Jezebel sent him a message. By this time tomorrow, you will be as dead as every prophet you killed yesterday. And Elijah, The man who had stood alone against 850 was afraid. The Hebrew word is yareh. It means more than nervous. It means shaking. Full-body terror that starts in your chest before your mind has caught up. He ran south. He left his servant behind. He walked a full day into the wilderness alone. He sat down under a rotham tree, a desert broom shrub, barely enough branches to cast a shadow on a hot afternoon. And he said 5 words. "It is enough. I am done." He asked God to take his life. Then he lay down and slept. Pay attention to what God does next, because this is the moment that should permanently change the way you read the Old Testament. God did not send thunder. He did not send a rebuke. He did not send an angel with a correction or a list of everything Elijah had gotten wrong. He did not say, "After everything I just did on that mountain, you are going to run from one woman?"
God sent an angel with bread, fresh bread, baked on hot coals, a jar of water. The angel touched Elijah on the shoulder. The Hebrew implies a gentle touch, almost tender, and said 4 words. Arise and eat. That is all. No sermon, no explanation, no performance review. Just arise and eat. Elijah ate. He lay back down. The angel came a second time, touched him again, and this time said something slightly different. Arise and eat. The journey is too great for you. Not, you are too weak. Not, you are a disappointment. The journey is too great for you. An acknowledgement, a recognition. God did not look at Elijah's exhaustion as a character flaw. He looked at it the way a good father looks at a child who has been running too hard for too long. And instead of demanding more, he offered food. Elijah traveled 40 days on the strength of that meal. When he arrived at Mount Horeb and hid in a cave, God came to him. Not in the wind that tore the mountains, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. In a call demama dakah, a voice of thin silence, a sound like the absence of sound, a frequency you can only hear when everything else has gone completely still.
And God asked him a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Not an accusation, a question. The same posture as the garden. "Where are you? What are you doing here?" And God gave him new instructions, new assignments, names of people Elijah had never met who would carry the work forward. And one more thing. There are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. Elijah had run because he believed he was the last one standing. He was not even close. If you have done something great for God and then fallen apart afterward, if the crash after the mountain has made you wonder whether the mountain even meant anything, I need you to hear what Elijah heard in that cave. The crash is not a sign that you failed. It is a sign that you are human. And the God who called down fire on Carmel is the same God who bakes bread in the wilderness and speaks in silences thin enough to reach only a broken open heart.
We have talked about a man who ran from shame, a man who ran from guilt, a man who ran from his calling, a man who ran from exhaustion and the wreckage of his own success. Now we come to the hardest one, a man who ran from love. Peter did not run to another city. He did not board a ship. He did not disappear into a wilderness. His was the smallest geography of all, a courtyard, a fire, 3 questions, 3 answers. And yet in some ways, his was the longest distance any of these men traveled, because Peter had promised he would never run. That is what makes his story different from every other story in this video. Adam did not promise to stay in the garden.
Moses did not vow to remain in Egypt. Jonah said nothing before he bought his ticket. Elijah ran without warning. But Peter stood up in the upper room on the last night and said with the full force of his personality behind every word, "Even if everyone else falls away, I will not. Lord, I will go with you to prison and to death."
And Jesus looked at him and said, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." Peter did not believe it. A few hours later, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when soldiers came with torches and swords, Peter drew a blade and cut off a man's ear. He was not running, he was fighting. He would have died in that garden if Jesus had let him. But Jesus healed the ear. Jesus told Peter to put the sword away. Jesus let himself be arrested. And Peter followed at a distance. That phrase, followed at a distance, it appears in all 4 Gospels. Every writer felt it was important enough to preserve. Peter did not abandon Jesus. Not yet. He followed. Just far enough back that no one would connect them. Just close enough that he could still see what was happening. He ended up in a courtyard. There was a charcoal fire. It was cold. He stood near the fire and warmed his hands. And a servant girl looked at him across the flames and said, "You were with him. You are one of his disciples." Peter said, "I am not."
3 times. A servant girl, a man standing nearby, a third man who said he had seen Peter in the garden. 3 people, 3 questions, 3 denials. And after the third one, the rooster crowed. And Jesus, being led through the courtyard at that exact moment, turned and looked at Peter. The text says Peter went out and wept bitterly. He did not see Jesus again until the resurrection. And even then, even after the empty tomb, even after the folded grave clothes, even after the first reports from Mary, Peter went back to fishing. John chapter 21. I am going fishing. 6 disciples said they would come. They fished all night and caught nothing. And in the early morning light, a figure stood on the shore and called out, "Children, do you have any fish?" They did not recognize him. He told them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. The net filled with 153 fish and could not be hauled in. And the disciple Jesus loved said 3 words to Peter. "It is the Lord."
And Peter, the man who had followed at a distance, who had stood at a charcoal fire and said 3 times that he did not know the man, jumped into the water. He did not wait for the boat. He did not weigh the last conversation against this one. He just jumped. When they came ashore, there was a charcoal fire already burning, fish on it, bread beside it. That detail is not accidental. John uses the Greek word anthrakia for charcoal fire. It appears exactly twice in the entire New Testament. Once in the courtyard where Peter denied Jesus. Once on this beach where Jesus is cooking breakfast. John chose that word both times deliberately. He wanted you to feel the echo. The first charcoal fire. Are you one of his disciples? No, no, no. The second charcoal fire. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, yes, you know that I love you. 3 denials, 3 restorations, 1 breakfast. Not because Peter had earned it, not because the rooster could be uncrowed, but because the God who pursued Jonah across the Mediterranean and baked bread in the wilderness and spoke to Moses from a fire that would not consume, that same God cooked fish on a beach and gave a broken fisherman 3 chances to say out loud what he had been too afraid to say in a courtyard. I love you. I love you. I love you. And it was enough.
5 people, 5 flights. And now you can see the shape of it.
Adam ran from shame. Moses ran from guilt. Jonah ran from calling. Elijah ran from exhaustion. Peter ran from grief and the memory of a look across a firelit courtyard. Different reasons, different directions, different distances. Same God. And here is what should stop you cold, because it stopped me cold the first time I saw it clearly. In not one of these 5 stories does God respond to the running with punishment. Not one. Adam receives consequences, yes, but God also makes clothes for him with his own hands before sending him out. Moses spends 40 years in a desert, yes, but God was doing something in that desert that Egypt never could have. Jonah gets swallowed by a fish, but the fish is not a punishment. The fish is a rescue. Elijah sits under a broom tree and asks to die, and the first response from heaven is not a lecture. It is bread. Peter denies Jesus 3 times and spends 3 days convinced it is over, and Jesus cooks him breakfast on a beach.
Every single time, the pursuit looks like provision. Every single time, the response to running looks less like a penalty and more like a meal. Now, I promised you we would come back to the garden, to those 4 Hebrew words, to the first question God ever asked a human being. Ayeka. Where are you? God is omniscient. He knew exactly where Adam was. He could see him in the underbrush, heart hammering, leaves pulled over his shoulders. He did not ask the question because he needed information. He asked the question because he wanted Adam to answer. He wanted Adam to come out of the trees, not to face a firing squad, not to be cataloged and punished and sent away, but because the hiding was worse than the consequence. Because shame that stays hidden grows in the dark. Because the distance between a person and God does not protect the person. It only protects the shame. Where are you? It is the first question in the Bible, and in one form or another, it is every question in the Bible. It is the subtext beneath every prophet's cry, every psalm's anguish, every letter Paul ever wrote from a prison cell. Where are you? Come back. The door is still open. The fire is still burning. The bread is still warm.
This is not a God who throws lightning at runners. This is a God who sends fish, who bakes bread in a desert, who speaks in silences thin enough to hear only when everything else has gone quiet, who builds a fire on a beach at dawn and waits for a soaking wet fisherman to come dripping up the sand. And this is the part where I need to ask you the question directly, because this video was never really about 5 people in the ancient world. It was about you. You have run from something. Maybe you ran from a calling that felt too large for a person like you. Maybe you ran from a failure you cannot forgive yourself for. Maybe you ran from God himself, not on a ship, not into a desert, but in the quieter ways that people run. Staying busy, staying numb, going back to the fishing boat, telling yourself the silence has gone on too long, the distance has grown too wide. The look across the courtyard was the last conversation, and there was no coming back from it. But here is what 5 stories and several thousand years of scripture will not stop insisting, in case you have not heard it enough times yet.
God is not waiting for you at the finish line. The question is not whether he will find you. The question he has been asking since a garden at the beginning of the world, the question he is still asking right now, is whether you will answer. Where are you? Come out of the trees. 3 things to carry with you. First, running from God does not disqualify you from God. Every single person in this video ended up doing exactly what they were called to do. Adam's line produced the one who would crush the serpent's head. Moses led the Exodus. Jonah, reluctantly, furiously, still arguing with God from outside the city walls,
sparked the largest revival in the ancient world. Elijah finished his ministry and was taken to heaven in a chariot of fire without ever tasting death. Peter became the rock the early church was built on. The running was not the end of the story, not for any of them. Second, the way God pursues looks almost nothing like what we expect. We expect fire and judgment. We get bread. We expect distance and silence. We get a voice thin as the absence of sound in a cave on a mountain. We expect 3 strikes and you are finished.
We get a charcoal fire and 3 chances to say the thing we were too afraid to say the first time. Third, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this room, the first question God asked in all of Scripture is still being asked right now, not as an accusation, not as a rebuke, as an invitation. Where are you? He already knows the answer. He has always known. He is asking because he wants to hear your voice. Because the God who made you from the dust of the ground and breathed life into you with his own breath has never, not once, not for a single day of your running, stopped wanting you to come back out of the trees. The garden is quiet. The footsteps are still coming. And the oldest question in the world is still waiting for your answer. If this story met you somewhere real today, share it with someone who might be running. Subscribe if you want more. There are more stories like this one. And every single one of them ends the same way. God finds his people. He always does.